Welcome to the Holy Post. A new survey of worship leaders finds that just 4 megachurches have cornered the worship music market. Should we care who's writing the songs we sing in church? And what gets lost when market forces influence local ministries? Then, a sermon clip has gone viral showing a megachurch pastor scolding people who arrive late or leave early because they're treating the church, quote, like it's a religious show instead of a welcoming family. But are the people acting like church is a show because that's exactly the model the church has created? We explore the history of how churches came to copy theaters and its impact on its mission and power. Then, Phil talks to Karen Swallow Pryor about her new book, The Evangelical Imagination, How Stories, Images, and Metaphors Created a Culture in Crisis. All of that, plus a celebrity bear that is above the law. As always, we have some amazing new bonus material this week exclusively for Holy Post Plus subscribers. First, my conversation with Mike Erie about the worship music industry and church went a bit long, and we had to cut a good chunk of it from this episode. But Holy Post Plus subscribers will get to hear the whole thing in a bonus segment. And we have a new edition of the Holy Post Office, where Mike and I spend about 30 minutes answering a question that you all voted on. And this time the question is, what is our view of the times in the Old Testament when God commands Israel to annihilate other nations? And I'll be honest with you, even I was shocked with where Mike Erie went with his answer, and you will be too. Holy Post Plus subscribers will get access to all of that, plus ad-free episodes, exclusive shows, merchandise, live streams, and the Holy Post Book Club, and a lot more. So go to holypost.com to learn more about how you can subscribe. Here is episode 577. Hey everyone, it's Sky. Welcome to the Holy Post. I have some good news, bad news for everybody. I am joined today, good news.
Oh, I was going to say, which is it?
Good. Yeah, once again, Mike Erie is back. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Just hi? That's it?
Well, I wanted to hear whether or not I was the good news or bad news.
No, you're the good news. You're back. Mike was with us last week, filling in because Phil had taken the week off.
Literally filling in.
Filling the shoes, right? For those who don't know Mike, he's the host of the Voxology podcast. He's a pastor near Nashville. We've been friends since college. We go
male model.
Male model?
Yeah.
Meaning, okay,
yeah.
Sure. Yep. Somewhere.
My wife has said I look great in socks. So.
Well, okay, all right. You're putting images in people's heads that we don't need. Let's get to the bad news. So the bad news was, my co-hosts just keep dropping out on me.
Yeah.
So Phil was supposed to be back this week, but then he decided kind of late in the game that he was going to go to the Okoboji Bible Conference with the rest of his family, which originally he wasn't going to go. And so he dropped out late in the week.
Yeah.
Christian is scheduled to be on with us today, and she just mere hours ago contacted us and said that she was supposed to fly back from Mississippi today, and her flight either got canceled or delayed. So I'm left with just Mike. It's just me and Mike.
Well, left with is a choice of words that I would take issue with, because for those watching on YouTube, when you open the video and it's these two faces, some would say it's an upgrade. I'm just going to throw that out there. Two very handsome men who don't need follicles to be handsome are here having an intelligent discussion about something. And I just left with, it feels like, I don't know. I feel like the third date to the prom, which is true. It's okay.
Well,
it's revisiting past trauma. I'm fine. Go ahead.
It feels more like Left Behind. Like my other co-hosts were raptured away, and here we are.
We're the tribulation force.
That's right. All right. With that, here's the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post.
This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode.
Okay, we're kicking off today with some animal news. Last week we had a trifecta with animal news, butt news, and what could possibly go wrong. But I just have animal news today.
Yeah, there was nowhere to go but down after that last week. I mean, you were on
We're
fire.
keeping things really simple. This is from the New York Times. One of the most prolific thieves in the South Lake Tahoe, California area has been safely apprehended Friday morning. This is just mere days ago.
Mere days.
This prolific thief is a 400-pound black bear that the public has come to know as Hank the Tank.
Which, by the way,
what a great name!
What a great name, because he is streaking.
Yeah.
I mean,
what does that streaking have to do with anything?
Okay, all right, Sky. Let's break this down. I know you're very holy in your personal life, but there was a movie called Old School, where Hank the Tank was the name of Will Ferrell, and Will Ferrell would love to go streaking. And I thought, well, bears don't wear clothes, so he's always streaking, and so Hank the Tank, it just fit together like a glove.
I did not know that was from Old School.
I will refrain from further comments.
Okay,
and old school references.
I wouldn't watch such a thing. Let no unwholesome thing come before my eyes.
Yeah.
Okay, the story continues. The captured bear was responsible for at least 21 home break-ins and extensive property damage, dating back to early 2022. The public initially thought Hank the Tank was one male bear, but the bear that was captured on Friday is a female known to the state as 64F.
Oh, that's a downgrade.
Yeah, it's one of 3 bears responsible for some of the break-ins in the area that have been attributed to Hank. For over a year, this Hank has terrorized members of the community, ripping off screen doors and parts of garage doors, rummaging through garbage bins, climbing stairs, and scratching up cars, prompting dozens of calls to the police. Okay, now here's the part I really wanted to focus on, and the reason why this story captured my attention. Hank, the Tank, was tranquilized and is being transported to a wildlife sanctuary in Colorado.
Okay.
Which sounds great.
Yeah, humane.
But here's the weird part. The story goes on to say that Hank's circumstances are pretty rare, as most problem bears are euthanized, and anywhere from 300 to close to 1,000 bears are put down each year in the United States. So the obvious question to anyone reading the story is, if we euthanize 300 to 1,000 problematic bears every year, why is Hank the Tank not being euthanized, but instead she is being transported to an animal sanctuary in Colorado? Well, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife said that it's in its statement that it has pursued, quote, an alternative solution for Hank, quote, given the widespread interest in this bear.
See, that's code for celebrity. It's another example of where celebrities are treated differently than the rest of us.
Right.
So
and given the
can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, but
I'm sorry.
Wait, I just want to frame this though, because we are having a nationwide debate right now about the application of justice in our legal system, and is it applied equally and fairly,
Not in this
regardless of right? And I think here's another example of maybe we have a biased system. Now, Mike, your observation.
Well, no, this is more a clarifying question because I was a little confused. Is Hank female? So Hank's name is 64F. And so Hank, so we've got a misnaming going on. It's not Hank the Tank, it's Henrietta the Tank or something. And then what was the thing about 2 other bears? Is this a ring? Is this a family thing? Was there any clarity about that?
Yeah, apparently what happened here is there were 3 different bears that were breaking into people's homes and causing damage and doing stuff. And they know because after they have these break-ins, they actually do DNA testing to determine if it's the same bear. And they found that the Hank they caught
Okay.
is responsible for 21 of these break-ins, but there were a handful of other break-ins that apparently 2 other bears were responsible for, but far fewer.
Okay.
So the one they caught is the main culprit here.
Okay.
But basically, whenever a bear was breaking into a house and doing damage, they were referring to that bear. It's got to be Hank the Tank. They thought it was all the same bear, and they thought the bear was male. Turns out that she was female, and they called him Hank the Tank because he's just enormous. Like, this female bear is really, really big, much larger than your average bear. But I like it's just it is interesting to me that the Wildlife Commission here in California didn't euthanize this bear because of the publicity.
Totally.
But it just shows, like, when you are famous, when you get a lot of attention, you get special treatment.
Yep.
And if this were just a run-of-the-mill bear causing problems, they'd be done.
Yeah.
Be over.
Agreed.
So it's not just the church that has a celebrity problem.
Absolutely, Sky. Totally agree. And it would be interesting if they had caught one of the other culprits. Would there have been a similar sentence brought to them? Or if they do, will we ever know? So absolutely, will there be a cover-up if one of the other 2 culprits is apprehended and we won't know what happens to them?
So, Mike, would you be more in favor of euthanizing Hank or not euthanizing the other 300 to 1,000 bears and just relocating them every year?
I'm in favor of more animals over less animals. So, I mean, in general, I think my policy would be if we can do everything we can to relocate so that the bear flourishes and the human community flourishes, fantastic. But I would understand it, not that I'm some expert, that there are bears that for some reason have been or become very aggressive towards human communities. And, those, if they can't be relocated safely, then I'd be okay with, however you would do that.
Okay, before we leave this story, I'm going to pull on you what
This is very sad.
What Phil often pulls on me. As quickly as you can, use this story as a sermon illustration. How would you apply it?
Ladies and gentlemen, sin is like a house in South Lake Tahoe. And when we're driven by our appetites, we become like an unthinking bear, simply rummaging around for what's left, whether it's good for us or bad for us. God and the Holy Spirit are like the animal authorities that check our DNA, track us down, and then hopefully relocate us instead of tranquilizing us straight to heaven. Let's close in prayer.
So what you're saying is, if you're driven by your appetites, and rummaging in sin, at least be a celebrity.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Yes, you want to be a David. Absolutely. No question about it. Sin big.
Because if you're just an anonymous sinner, you're toast. No. You're done.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking more, I like the idea of relocated versus tranquilized. I mean, both could be good options spiritually.
All right. Well, this has been Animal
makes
News.
You do this?
Oh, yeah. He does this all the time. He'll just throw it at me. No warning. Funny. Come up with a sermon.
How would you do it? How would you do it?
Oh, I didn't think about this one in that regard.
Well, I didn't think of it either. You just spring it on me.
Okay, here you go.
Let's go.
Just as Hank the Tank has been transferred from an inhospitable environment in South Lake Tahoe to a beautiful animal sanctuary in Colorado, so Christ has transferred us from a kingdom of darkness into a kingdom of light where we can thrive in our God-intended habitat. Exactly. There you go. There's my application.
All right, that was way better. Way better.
All right.
Well done, Scott. I'm glad I asked.
This has been Animal News. All right, Mike, I want to talk about worship today.
Yes.
And we're going to hit this on kind of different angles. And I want to begin with a story that, where did I find this story? I don't even know where this came from. Oh, it was in CT. A CT article reported by Bob Smentana. It actually came out last month. It's been sitting in my files for a while. Never got to it, but we're getting to it today. Churches continue to sing Hillsong and Bethel despite controversies.
Yeah,
so there's this big study that was done about worship leaders all over the country, asking them, what music are you using? Why are you using it? All that. So here's the report. For the past decade, a handful of megachurches have dominated worship music. Really, I think just 4 have a significant majority of the market on worship music. A new study found that few worship leaders avoid songs from Hillsong and Bethel, two of the so-called Big Four megachurches that dominate modern worship music. The study found that most worship leaders connect with songs because they've experienced them firsthand at a conference or by listening to them online or because a friend or church member recommended them, rather than seeing the song at the top of the charts or on a list of new songs. So the study goes on to just ask worship leaders, how are you picking the music that you are using in your church gatherings?
That's a great question.
And one of the things that came out of this was, despite some of the bad press, controversies that have come out, especially from Hillsong and Bethel recently, that has not deterred anybody from using their music in worship. And then they went deeper to ask, well, okay, how are you picking music for your worship? And
Great.
The person quoted in this, who's a Christian musician turned marketer named Elias Dummer, Dummer. I'm not making that up.
No,
Elias
I know.
Dummer.
I actually know him.
Do you?
Yeah, he was at our church. He just moved.
Wow. All right.
I hope he's being quoted positively.
No,
he's a good guy.
He was part of the research team in this study that Bob talked to for the report. He said most worship leaders think they have good reasons for picking the songs they use in worship, but they may not be aware of how social forces, like the popularity of certain churches, affects their choices. He goes on to say, while people say that they care about the songs, they pick the same 4 churches over and over again.
Wow.
So he seems to be questioning what worship leaders themselves are reporting. Worship leaders are saying, well, I pick a song because I really like it, or I pick it because my pastor or church leaders or whatever really recommend it. And what he seems to be saying is, yeah, that's probably true, but you're downplaying how affected you really are by the charts and the popularity of these 4 mega churches that are producing so much of this content. So let me throw this to get you started, Mike. Should we care who wrote or produced the music that we sing in our churches, or should we only care about the music itself?
Oh, so good. You know, Sky, as you were reviewing that, I had so many thoughts. One is, I'm sorry we've reduced worship leading to song picking. Boy, that is a tragedy. Secondly, I think
that's also a pet peeve of mine, is just when people use the word worship to mean music.
Totally.
Because it's too narrow. But anyways.
Yeah, no, that's not just like, that's not a pet peeve. That's a major issue in the American church, is that we've reduced that to song picking. And I would totally agree with Elias that if you're song leading and people are standing up, weeping with their arms raised, it is a much better experience for you than if people are standing there or sitting there with their arms crossed, totally unresponsive. So I would imagine the temptation would be to choose songs that are much more highly engaged and provoke response.
Sure. Right.
Having said that, I was thinking about it a little bit in the sense that, well, I mean, can I read the Psalms knowing that David wrote a bunch of them and knowing how jacked up that guy was? And so in one sense, no, I don't know that I care as much about the kinds of people who wrote the music, because I'm looking at Solomon for Proverbs, I'm looking at David for the Psalms, and going, you know, great stuff can come. And for us, right? I mean, we're not, we're not all that great, and yet God every now and again uses us. So the concern I have is the fact that we've not only diminished worship into singing, as we said, but we're not very incarnational in our approach to church ministry. In other words, I can go to, I don't know how many different megachurches across the country geographically and have the same experience, sing the same songs, hear roughly the same sort of therapeutic message.
It's not just megachurches, though, Mike. I mean, non-megachurches use the same music.
Yeah.
And often are teaching the same content.
Yeah. And so I would have an issue with that. I think that's a kind of a farming out of what the local church, it'd be like borrowing everyone's, sermon series. If we all just decided to do the same sermon series together, there's something about the incarnation of worship that is being ignored in the conversation. Not only that, And I'm not sure, I don't know about Bethel, but I certainly wouldn't want to give money to people who've shown that they're not super trustworthy with it. So I'd have that kind of stewardship question. But for me, one of the things, so we'll sing every now and again songs that are kind of the big anthems, but we do a lot of writing of our own music, and we do that in conjunction with teaching. So I'm sitting with songwriters, and we're chewing on, theological concepts, and they're generating songs for whatever season we're in the community. And some of them are really great, and some of them are just okay. But I think the value of what that communicates is significant. And I'm not saying it's wrong to sing these songs or whatever, but I think there's something that's missed if that's the only diet we're consisting. That's the only thing our diet consists of. I think there's a part of the call of a church is to inhabit a space and a place and a time. And I just don't think you can farm that out to other churches or other preachers or other communities.
So, I mean, you're raising a bunch of different issues here, and it's hard to parse through all of them.
Yeah.
Like there have been some people, get out of the music discussion for a minute. Let's just talk theology. There's a lot of problematic theologians throughout church history.
Right.
From the beginning, because there are some early church fathers some of whom held some heretical ideas, while at the same time promoting some very orthodox ideas.
Yeah.
Can you take the orthodox ones and just leave the heretical ones? Then you go further forward, and lots been made of the fact that people like Jonathan Edwards were pro-slavery.
Yep.
And can you accept Edwards' in many cases brilliant theological insights, knowing that he endorsed human chattel slavery?
Yeah.
Like that's a big question people have. Or do you have to or Martin Luther was a raging anti-Semite in some regards.
No, later Luther, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's whole denominations built on Luther's theology.
Right.
Calvin had his problem. All this. So similarly then, do you have to discount the source of music if its composer, writer, or the organization that produced it has some skeletons in its closet?
Totally.
I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah.
But then the second question is your point of incarnational development. I mean, you're uniquely positioned because you're in Nashville, for goodness sake. You have musicians in your congregation with gifting to do that. Most churches are not going to be equipped to write their own music.
Totally agree.
But we do have a huge library of Christian music stretching back 2,000 years, even older if you want to go into the Psalms. And there isn't as much creativity in the curation of that music as maybe there could be, right?
Yeah. Yep. I totally agree.
Is that what you're arguing?
That point, yes. But to your first one, and it's really good. I mean, because there are times when sin would be so egregious that would cancel out the good of someone's ministry. But when our faith is founded upon Paul, who was a murderer, and Peter, who was a denier, and quite honestly, I mean, he had to be rebuked by Paul in Galatians. I mean, he was slow on the uptake about the Gentile thing. Like we already have built in permission for people not to be perfect and for us to be able to sift and sort from their imperfection the things that might be of God. That can be misused, of course, as we've seen it with some high-profile celebrities where we just point at the fruit of their ministry and it doesn't matter about their character. That's not at all what we want to suggest. I'm just able to live in a bit of the ambiguity because of how honest the biblical portrayals are of all of the heroes. And that's where I'm like, okay, so that hasn't changed. But I do then ask questions about stewardship and safety of my community and trust and who we should, recommend to people and who we shouldn't. Those sorts of things, absolutely. But I'm at least willing to entertain the possibility of quoting imperfect people, because last I checked, that's all we got. Those are the only options.
So, okay, going back to Bible characters and specifically the Psalms, I've been going through this summer a series in my daily devotional, With God Daily, that I write for people who hate daily devotionals. We've been going through the Psalms, and one of the things that pops up pretty frequently is, frankly, some of the Psalms say some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah,
and sometimes internally contradictory things. Some really brutal things about God, accusing him of being malicious and unfair and
Yeah.
going back on his promises and all that. And so but some people get onto those Psalms and be like, what do you do with this? Because they've been kind of formed to look at all scripture the same way.
That's right.
And
That's good, Scott.
they view the Psalms as authoritative, and here's this crazy stuff about God. And so one of the things I've had to repeat numerous times in this series is that we have to approach the Psalms as descriptive rather than prescriptive. These are many cases David, but others who are describing their relationship with God, and they're brutally honest at times in the way they feel, but they're not always revealing truth about God. They're revealing truth about their relationship with God, but not just objective truth about God.
That's right.
And that allows me to take a psalm like something David did, knowing how flawed and sinful and screwed up he was as a person. And rather than taking his words about God as authoritative, I'm taking his relationship with God as instructive.
That's good.
And that allows me to engage those songs differently.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, and data shows this, a lot of people are getting their primary theology from the music that they sing in church.
Yeah.
It's not coming from the sermon. It's not coming from their own Bible study. It is coming from the lyrics that they are singing week after week after week. And that's where I wonder, does the source of that lyric matter more when it's carrying that much theological heft?
Oh, that's a great question.
In a way which even the Psalms, I don't think, carry that kind of heft.
Oof. Because from my understanding of like medieval theology, the stained glass windows were a way to tell the Christian story to people who weren't always literate, or maybe they didn't know Latin, or whatever it was.
Right.
So I wonder, one question is, I wonder if the songs have always been meant to communicate theology, and carry that weight. But I do think you're onto something when we talk about if that's the primary way people are being formed. See, so if you're in a church where you can't afford to write your own music, but if you're playing those songs to be relevant or to try to draw young people, if there's some instrumental, not musically, but instrumental reason, utilitarian reason you're choosing these songs, I would want us to rethink why songs are chosen and how, and what constitutes a successful quote unquote worship service, right? Because there are, just as there are so many vapid, individualistic, Jesus is the king of my heart. What does that even mean? I hate that song, because that is so not at all the scriptural teaching. And I know it's dumb and it's pet peeve stuff, but there's another sense where we have this incredible liturgy of deep theology sitting there, but it's maybe not as singable or maybe not as approachable. But it's also very formative. And so when we reduce like the teaching element and the worship element to this sort of teaching and concert event, I think we miss opportunities to do exactly what you're talking about. Even if you can't write your own stuff, there's been so much that's written that's beautiful and good. And I'm not saying it has to be a hymn in order to be theologically rich. Not at all. I'm just saying the method that we use to evaluate what a church service is, what is a good one versus what is a bad one, what is a faithful one versus one that's not faithful, and to carry into those conversations, the conversation that should exist between teaching and worship leading, because they're both leading people into a vision of God. I'm sad that there isn't more around that dialogue, and it feels like there are great ways for music to be really prophetic in our world, like lament. There just aren't a lot of lament songs. And so as a result, we feel like our church services always have to end in a red bow. And as we carry the red bow forward, right, we can never really grieve or be angry, and we read the Psalms and are horrified. The ancients never read the Psalms and were horrified. They're like, yeah, that's actually how I feel, and how cool that got enshrined into the text so that imperfect people could cry out to God in those ways.
So you and I were both in seminary in the late 90s at sort of the
height of grunge.
Height of grunge was also the height of the church growth movement.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at different seminaries, but I wonder if your experience was anything like mine, where I was bombarded with books and philosophies of ministry that argued a church gathering must always be celebratory.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Lament. There was no imagination for lament, let alone
The world laments
silence.
enough, man. Come
Right,
on.
right. It was supposed to be celebratory 100% of the time.
Totally.
And the other thing, and I'm not a worship leader, I'm not a musician, this is not my area, but the other thing that I was really instructed in, and I think it dates back primarily to Willow Creek, where they were seen as highly innovative in the 70s and 80s.
Absolutely.
And one of the things they really advocated for, and I forget the name of the guy who was their early kind of worship pioneer there, but he really drove home this notion that worship should be done in what he called the heart language.
Oh, I remember.
Right? Do you remember that language?
Yes.
Heart language.
Yeah.
And so a generation that grew up on rock and roll and contemporary music in the 60s and 70s wanted to express themselves genuinely to God in that style. So they were advocating, of course, for electric guitars and drums and all.
Yeah.
And this is when the worship wars were still going on and people were
yeah.
fighting and right between hymns and choruses and all that. And the heart language thing was used all over the place. Like whatever your indigenous way of expressing yourself is, that's what your worship should be.
Yep.
And I read books on this and was schooled in this and instructed in this. And I don't disagree. But what that conversation ignored is it only saw one side of the dialogue. It only saw what are my natural inclinations to express myself to God? And it bypassed, how does this activity of gathering with other believers and engaging in these songs, how does it form you? And that's what the church throughout history has understood, that these practices, these songs, these rituals, these liturgies, they're not just expressive, they're also deeply formative.
That's it.
And it felt like that was never really addressed in seminary and even after seminary. It was all just, how do we express ourselves to God? It wasn't about, what are we actually forming people into here?
Yes.
So that means maybe we should engage stuff that isn't just exciting or entertaining.
Right.
But maybe we need to engage forms, music, lyrics, styles that are uncomfortable or challenging or push us in a new direction.
Oh, so good.
But there's very little tolerance for that in a consumer-driven religious marketplace.
That's it. And Scott, that's so good. Like, so I've been reading some Charles Taylor, Secular Age, and he talks about, disenchantment, but he talks about how we've replaced kind of the transcendent frame of reference with the immanent frame of reference. That we're all very individually focused, and our individualism is expressive. So there are some scholars that call it expressive individualism, or emotivism is another way to say it. And that even our gospeling, our doctrining, our worshiping is all based around the meeting of desire and preference, and then the permission to express myself authentically and individually in whatever way I find meaningful. And I there's some great parts to all of that I think are great correctives. But then there are other parts in exactly this way that I want to be curious about and wonder how deeply they do form us. So many of the I songs, right? I mean, in the scripture, we all know this, the yous are all plural. So they're all about put on your armor of God. That's to the church. That's not one person putting on armor every morning. And so when we miss opportunities to sing corporate songs or sing lament songs or songs that are full of mystery and I don't know and doubt and I'm not sure, I think we're really missing an opportunity to do so much more than just generate an emotive response out of people, which is exactly what you're saying, right? These are instructive and formative. And so my objection to the whole four churches are leading us isn't that the four churches are bad or whatever. It's that four churches are leading us. I mean, that doesn't reflect the new humanity even remotely. And so I would just want to start that worship conversation on an entirely different footing about what worship is and the role of it in the church. And then go, it's for that reason I probably wouldn't want to have a diet predominantly of songs that are like, it's like when we're reading, and if all we're reading are white middle-aged authors, as a white middle-aged guy, that's a problem. And so it's more the diet, I think, that's the issue for me than necessarily the source of the songs.
So you're transitioning into the last thing I want to talk about today, which is also related to worship and formation in church and all this, and that is a little sermon segment that went viral a couple days ago
Oh,
of J.D. Greear, who's the lead pastor at the Summit Church in Durham, North Carolina, former president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And people have been defending him, criticizing him. They've been all over the map on him. And this clip, I don't want to get on J.D. Greer's case because I think it just illustrates a much bigger
totally.
dynamic that is worth talking about. So if you've not seen it, it'll obviously be in the show notes. But essentially, Greer scolded his church, which, from what I'm reading in this article, has 10,000 weekly attenders across 12 campuses. He scolded those people who show up late to worship services or who leave early. To give it some context, this is a quote from the message. He says, "There's something powerful about showing love to somebody that the world says is not worthy of love. Church, this ought to be the place where people from various ethnicities and classes and backgrounds put their arms around each other and love each other. Is that what people experience here?" I mean, that's a beautiful vision of what the church is supposed to be. Amen, 100%.
Yeah.
He goes on to tell the attenders that he gets irritated when people come to worship services late or leave 5 minutes early before the congregation is dismissed. And this is a quote: "It's not that I'm mad that you're missing part of the service. It's that you treat church like it's a religious show instead of a welcoming family that you're a part of." He went on to say that attenders who come late and leave early are the problem
Right.
when it comes to visitors saying that the church is, quote, unfriendly and it feels like a big production. So, and this was not part of the original clip. I read this in an article elsewhere about it, but apparently he goes on in the message to criticize those who watch the church via live stream. And he says, "Don't even get me started about you guys sitting at home in your pajamas streaming online when you're healthy and you should be in church." He says, "If you've got health issues, I get it. That's fine. If you're traveling, I understand. But some of you are still sitting at home right now on your couch because you've reduced church to a program you watch, and that is not church at all." Okay, so this raises all kinds of interesting questions. And let me just throw it over to you, Mike. What's your initial reaction to his critique?
Well, first of all, as a very imperfect person who thankfully has never had a clip of a dumb thing I've said go viral, I have all the sympathy in the world for things taken out of context and judgments made on 30-second sound bites. However, this is exactly, I mean, Sky, I love that you put all these stories together because it's exactly what we're talking about. In this case, he's standing on a stage in front of how many cameras, a floor-to-ceiling video screens, people arranged in an audience, and then he's accusing them of looking at making this a big production and watching it on a screen online, where I wonder if at their satellite locations, he's just on a screen. So we'd have that question: are other people like live preaching there? But if it's just him beamed on screens, and he's going to have the audacity to accuse his community of making this a big production and show, and then you ask,
hold on, hold on.
Okay.
Just to play devil's advocate or
do it,
defend him. Like I understand what he's getting at. I think what he's trying to say is those minutes you are gathered before the service starts, and those minutes after the service is over, when people are interacting and mingling and talking with one another, that's when connections happen. That's when people can feel welcome. That's when people can feel cared for. That's when relationships can be, re-engaged. That's when community happens. And he's saying that's really, really important.
right?
And for you not to be present for that because you leave early or you come late or you don't come at all, like you're missing out on what church is. I agree. Like, I don't think he's wrong there. The problem is, who's to blame for people acting like this is a performance at a theater?
Exactly.
Rather than a community or a family.
Right.
Is it the people who come with that mindset, or is it the fact that we have built church to be a performance in a theatrical setting?
Absolutely.
and then people behave like it's a performance in a theatrical setting.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact that he looks at them, and the big issue I have is he looks at them and says, "You're the problem." Instead of, I think the much better question is, how have we formed people to view church this way? Right?
Yeah.
That's the question he should be asking. And that's what I just think so much of what I find unattractive about the stage and the presence of people on the stage is that we're not willing to ask the hard questions about ourselves, and we're just very easily willing to blame the people that are there. And I just find that in today's religious environment almost intolerable. Like that if I were visiting his church on that Sunday and that was the way he was talking to his church, that is about as unwelcome and unfriendly as I would imagine. So even his message about friendliness, but not only that, you can't tell a church of 10,000 people community happens here. I mean, what a lie. What a lie. It's just not true. And so again, it's all the reductions of church to event, of church to Sunday, of church to a sermon, of worship to singing. All of it misses the beautiful and compelling picture of what the church is to be in the Gospels.
Yeah, when I first saw that clip, the thought that came to mind is something that I heard Dallas Willard say many times in different settings where I was with him. He said, "Your system is perfectly designed to produce the results you are experiencing."
So good.
And
Yes.
and I've talked to Willard about that, and part of what I think he was getting at is sheep are sheep, and sheep will go where they are led. And I've been hearing more and more and more of this coming from church leaders, and I understand why. Like, it's a really challenging time to be a pastor. It's a really challenging time to be a denominational leader. There's all kinds of headwinds against you and so much rapid change in the culture. And I get the anxiety and the stress that that's inducing. And the temptation then is to blame the sheep for the problems that you're facing institutionally, organizationally, denominationally. We're blaming the sheep. They're too busy. They're workaholics. They're too involved in kids' sports. They're this, that, the other. They treat the church like a performance. They come late. They don't show up, blah, blah, blah. And I get the instinct to do that, but they're sheep. And at some point, we shepherds need to ask, how are the sheep doing what we have trained them to do? And maybe the system we've built is perfectly designed to produce the results we are experiencing. Maybe we need to own more of the problem. And here's the other thing. I really want to recommend a book to people if you're so inclined. It's kind of academic, but it was super informative to me years ago. I was using it for research on one of my books. It's called When Church Became Theater. Have you ever seen this?
No, but I'm already in.
So it's written by an academic named Jean Hallgren Kilde, Kilde. I think that's how you say her name. When Church Became Theater, the subtitle is The Transformation of Evangelical Architecture and Worship in 19th Century America.
Oh, I love it.
I know this sounds like a page turner, but let me give you the
No,
basic.
no, really.
The basic premise is this: that for 1900 years of church history, there were a handful of architectural forms church buildings took, right? You had cathedrals, you had more congregational spaces, but in the mid 19th century, you begin to see that change in America. And the reason was during the Second Great Awakening, you had these revivalist preachers roaming through the States, and they'd come into town and they'd set up a tent, and they would attract huge audiences of people. And they attracted them with two things: really gifted musicians and really entertaining orators. Right? Speakers. Totally. And they would come in and they'd have these revival meetings. And the churches in town, as this was going on for years and years during the Second Great Awakening, began to realize, in a competitive religious marketplace, the way we attract more religious consumers is with really entertaining music and really gifted preaching. And they started slowly changing the architecture of church design toward what she refers to as an auditorium design, which was it was theatrical seating, large stages, lighting, all this stuff that we now think of as commonplace in churches, all originated 150 some years ago in this era. And it fundamentally changed how the congregations worked. I'll give you, this is a quote from the back of the book. These worship spaces underscore performance and entertainment aspects of the service, and in so doing, transformed relationships between clergy and audiences. In auditorium churches, the congregants' personal and social power derived as much from consumerism as from piety. And clerical power lay in dramatic expertise rather than connections to social institutions. By erecting these buildings, argues Kild, middle-class religious audiences demonstrated the move toward a consumer-oriented model of religious participation that gave them unprecedented influence over the worship experience and church mission.
Man,
There it is.
That'll preach.
And that's why
Yep.
that's why Greer's comment on Twitter the other day.
Yeah.
It's like, this is not just true of megachurches.
Yeah.
This is true of virtually every evangelical church in North America.
Yeah.
Big or small, that we think of it as a performance, and then we get upset when people treat it as a performance. And if you if you want people to not treat it as a performance and treat church as a community,
Yeah.
then maybe we should structure it differently.
You know, can I add to that, Scott? That's so profound. And I found myself, when you were talking about they're the sheep, I found myself really pushing back against that, going, hey, that feels like part of the problem. Is that if I'm approaching people as if I'm the shepherd and they're the sheep, that seems like a dynamic I don't want to engage much. I'd rather like look at us as siblings, and we're co-learners and we're co-family members. And there's this old timey, and I know this is not what you were meaning, nor was Dallas. No. Your point stands. But it struck me how there is this thing I found in myself and other church leaders that, well, we are the shepherds and they are the sheep. And there's this kind of harshness to it. You know, there's this energy to it that's not like, no, I'm a sheep too. And I'm a co-learner. Like, I'm not a teacher. I'm a co-learner with this community. And so I'd love, just as a tiny part of the things that we're talking about, to change some of the language about how people who are paid by the church talk about people who aren't. And I wonder if that, as church as theater became kind of implemented architecturally, I wonder if the vocational language of those who are called into ministry versus those who aren't, or whatever, became almost visually represented more powerfully. Because now, go.
Okay, so here, I mean, we could have a whole nother dialogue about this, Mike. So I agree and I disagree with you. And here's why. I agree with Kild's premise that when church became theater, it gave unprecedented power to the members, to the congregants, right? The religious consumer now determines, because the consumer is always king, right? They determine the kind of music they like. They determine the kind of preaching they like. So I think what happened was, in the last 150 years, the power of the congregants has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And ironically, the power of the shepherds or the church leaders has actually gotten incredibly small. And in response to that reality, the impulse from the shepherds or from the pastors has been, well, then I need to really lord it over them. I need to really inflate my status as a reaction to it's a way of actually betraying the fact that they don't have power and they know it. And so I agree with your sense of mutuality. But when you look at the language of the New Testament, Jesus is the good shepherd. Now, obviously, he did not lord it over the sheep. He gave himself up for them. Peter brings up the language of being an under shepherd of Christ and shepherding the flock, and not out of selfish gain, he says, but out of love. So I think there is a place for a godly form. And even Paul talks about view older men as fathers and older women as mothers in the church. Like, there is that household hierarchy kind of understanding of things, but it's not about control and domination. It's about shepherding and wisdom and care and nurture. And so I think what's happened is, we want to tell people what to do, but that's not what a shepherd does. What a shepherd does is lead them by example and care for them. And so I think there's a place for wiser, godly leaders in a church. To make decisions and create forms that bring nourishing and life and are formatively positive for the congregation, for their well-being. But when I look at the theater structure, I don't see any evidence, objective or anecdotal, that says this is good at making disciples. What I do see is lots of evidence that this is really satisfying to the egos of the people leading those institutions.
Well, in that sense, they've gotten bigger, right? So the
Right.
self-importance of the person on the stage is inflated dramatically.
Right. But they are actually completely subject to the whims of their consumers.
Totally. Oh, and what
Right.
a slavery that is.
It
Yes.
is. It is a form of slavery. So
Yeah.
that's why I'd argue these megachurch pastors, though they look so powerful,
Mm,
and megachurches look powerful, I call them Goliaths because they're felled with just one stone to the head, and they're over. They're incredibly fragile.
that's good.
And I think that is an intuitive sense that a lot of these megachurch pastors have. They know how fragile their systems and their own leadership really is, and they're terrified of their audience.
Yeah.
And so they actually have this overcorrection where they dominate and domineer because they're actually very, very fragile.
Yeah, I was amazed at how myself and others who led very large churches were led by fear, afraid to risk, afraid to try, afraid to be prophetic for what it would do. I mean, it's the capitalistic system sitting behind all of that, right? I get rewarded when people like it, and I get punished when people don't. And so yes, so my pushback on sheep was not against the idea, because how you articulated it, couldn't agree with more.
Yeah. Well, that's the New Testament articulation. It's hard to disagree with.
Well, yeah, but I think you put it a little better than they did. So we're going to call it the Sky Authorized version.
Right.
So yeah, and it's easy. And this is where I'm so glad I'm part of a church, because it's so easy to talk about the problems of the American church, which are legion and have always been, right? I mean, goodness, Israel saw God do amazing things, and then let's make a golden calf. So this has always been part of the issue. But I also, and I know you do, and this is why this conversation is so invigorating, like I'm part of the problem, but I want to be part of the growth beyond the problem, you know? And so I don't ever want people to hear absolute cynicism or discouragement about where the American church is, because there's so much good that we never know about that is happening. But I guess my goal, and I think you would agree with this, is that we just want to be more discerning about the things that seem normal in church life.
Right.
In the same way we're called to be discerning about the things that seem normal in American culture. And that when that gets farmed out to 4 churches writing songs for everybody, or the industrial complex telling us what books are most important to read or what content's most valuable, we really miss our kind of prophetic calling to embody and inhabit local space, place, and time, you know?
Yeah.
So
And
it's good.
To wrap it up, I think when I look at what J.D. Greear said in the fuller context of his message, there's a lot to agree with there. And I think he would agree with both of us that the heart of the church are unexpected relationships between sisters and brothers in Christ that nourish one another. It sounds like he's wholly on board with that, which is why he wants his people to encounter each other and have that. My only word back would be great. Then reorganize the resources and the deployment of the resources in your congregation to foster that.
Yeah.
Rather than the big
That's right.
stage performance thing. And I think we just lack the imagination in some sectors.
That's right.
To think of church differently because we've had this 150-year legacy of church as theater. We just assume that's how it's always supposed to be.
Well, and
how
it
it's always
looks
been.
successful because it attracts energy and crowds and popularity. And not for everybody, but for enough people that we're like, oh yeah, that's what a successful church is like. So our imaginations are held captive to a vision of faithful to Jesus that is more a reflection of the American dream than it is of any biblical conception of discipleship.
I remember when I was at a church for 20 years, partly on staff, partly as a member. At its peak, on like a really great year where we had a lot of people coming on Easter, we maybe had 1,000 people, but more often 500 to 700, something like that. And even at a church that size, I remember when I was on staff having a meeting with a church consultant because we were looking at trying to add some classroom space, and he came to us and we're looking at the blueprints, and he said, well, you can't add education space if you're not going to add revenue space.
Totally.
And I was like, well, what is revenue space?
Totally.
Revenue space is the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Because that's where you make revenue. The number of seats in your sanctuary means the number of people who are putting money in a plate, which dictates how much you can support as a ministry, And you realize there's also an economic lack of imagination that says you have to put on a big show to attract a lot of people to give their money to do all the other things.
Yes.
Right? And so it's just so we have the tail wagging the dog here, and it's so crazy. And yeah, we could.
Bill Hybels, one last. I'll never forget this. Bill Hybels in a book was talking about how he had to make budget decisions, and he broke his staff people into 2 columns: those who brought in money and those who cost money.
That's what I do with my children.
Absolutely. And
So
they're
far,
all costing.
That's right. None of them have moved over into the making money side yet. But anyway.
Oh, Sky, these are great, man. Love what you're doing.
Well, okay. I'm glad you were here to have this conversation. Somebody who is steeped in this stuff and dealing with it and trying to figure out the solutions and navigating it in a real community, as I am trying to as well.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you for being back. We have some bonus material that is going to be exclusive for Holy Post Plus supporters this week. Next week, Phil will be back. Caitlin and/or Christian will be back.
Hallelujah.
Mike will be gone. We don't have to hear from him again for a while.
Totally.
We have a great interview coming up in just a minute. Thank you guys all for hanging with us during these convoluted, crazy summer months. But we're grateful you're a part of the Holy Post community, and we'll see you guys next week. This episode is being sponsored by AG1 by Athletic Greens. Some of you know that my dad is a doctor, and as I get older, he's always telling me to watch my weight and exercise regularly. But in the last few years, he's also been telling me to pay attention to my gut health. He's been persuaded by all the research saying that the biome of good bacteria that lives in our guts is critical to our long-term health. There's just one problem. I hate taking lots of pills and vitamins and supplements. And why do they always have to be so big? That's one of the reasons I was excited to try AG1 by Athletic Greens. AG1 is a foundational nutritional drink with 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food ingredients. I take it first thing in the morning before I've had my tea and before I jump into my morning routine of writing my daily devotional. And I'll be honest, it tasted way better than I expected. I've been doing it for a few weeks now, and I feel great knowing I'm supporting my health and not having to gag down a bunch of giant pills every morning. And that's why I've stuck with it, because AG1 is a super easy daily habit. So, if you're looking for a simpler and cost-effective supplement routine, check out AG1 by Athletic Greens. And right now, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/holypost. That's athleticgreens.com/holypost.
Today's episode is sponsored by Blueland. Did you know we throw away an estimated 5 billion plastic hand soap and cleaning product bottles every year? And lots of that plastic ends up in our water supply, so that each of us are eating roughly a credit card's worth of plastic each week. Yuck! I don't want to eat plastic. Blueland is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic. Their idea is simple. They offer endlessly refillable cleaning products with a beautiful design that looks great on your counter. Just fill the bottles with water, drop in Blueland tablets, and wait for them to dissolve. You'll never ever have to buy giant bottles of cleaning supplies again. From cleaning sprays to hand soap, toilet bowl cleaner, and laundry tablets, all Blueland products are made with clean ingredients you can feel good about. And Blueland has an offer just for Holy Post listeners. Get 15% off your first purchase of any product. To get 15% off your first order, go to blueland.com/holypost. You won't want to miss this. blueland.com/holypost. That's blueland.com/holypost. And thanks to Blueland for sponsoring this episode.
In case you haven't noticed, evangelicalism is in a crisis. According to our guest today, it's really an identity crisis. Karen Swallow Pryor is an award-winning author, a monthly columnist for Religion News Service, and a speaker. She also taught literature for many years, and her new book is called The Evangelical Imagination: How Stories, Images, and Metaphors Created a Culture in Crisis. Phil recently talked to her about the book and the connection between evangelicalism's crisis and its origins. She says that a lot of evangelical values, concepts, and ideas aren't rooted in Christianity, but in Victorian culture. And as those Victorian ideas are being challenged or abandoned, it's causing evangelicalism to struggle as well. It's a fantastic interview. I was so happy she's back on the show. She brings so much wisdom, insight, and levity. Here is Phil's conversation with Karen Swallow Pryor.
I'm here with Karen Swallow Pryor. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Phil. It's great to be back with you again. It's been too long.
I know it's been a long time, and you're so chipper and colorful and fun to talk to that we need like regular doses of.
Yeah.
Can I still call you the notorious KSP, or have you retired that moniker?
I haven't retired it yet, so
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, but you got to be
Notorious
good
for short. No, I'm just kidding.
friends. Yeah, notorious. Yeah, absolutely. You've got a new book out, and that's why you're here. And I love the cover because it's so bright and colorful. Because I was reading your new book before bed at night, and even if the lights were out, I could see it on the floor and pick it up because it's so bright. It's called The Evangelical Imagination: How Stories, Images, and Metaphors Created a Culture in Crisis. So I've read much of it, not all of it. So I don't spoil the ending for me because I haven't gotten there. I'm not sure how we all end up, but I think
Raptured.
Oh yeah, is that how it ends? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the last chapter. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
I won't say more than that, but that's...
Okay. No spoilers. I'm waiting for the movie. I'm waiting for the Irwin brothers or the Kendrick brothers to do the movie version. And that'll be fantastic. The Evangelical Imagination: How Stories, Images, and Metaphors Created a Culture in Crisis. Okay, first of all, what culture are we talking about here specifically?
That's a good question. I mean, many people would prefer to call evangelicalism a subculture. And I think a few years ago, maybe I would have agreed. But I think given the times, we can say that evangelicalism in 21st century America is a pretty dominant culture. So we're talking about the evangelical culture in America.
Okay, so that's the culture. Then what's the crisis? What, from your vantage point, when you think this culture is in crisis, what are you picturing in your evangelical imagination?
Well, can I tell you a little backstory?
Yes.
So when we were the title that the book has, it was a working title. And as you know, publishers sometimes go with that and sometimes don't, but they chose that. But we had to do a lot of back and forth on the subtitle.
I bet.
And I really resisted. One editor posed the word crisis at some point, and I said, no, that just seems that's just too dramatic, and that's not where I am. But by the time I was submitting...
Yeah, what year was that?
Well, actually, I mean, I was doing revisions, up through the beginning of this year, so like this year. By the time we were landing the plane, I was like, okay, I think I'm good with using the word crisis. Yeah. So the crisis I'm talking about everyone's talking about the word evangelical in terms of the political situation and voting. And so I would see that situation as a crisis. But along with that, then because of that, I would say evangelicalism itself is in a crisis because we have a 300-year history and its origins were good and healthy, I think. And, not perfect, but I think that there is a tradition there that we have forgotten, left, abandoned, and now we find ourselves in this place where these things that were even good have become kind of distorted because they've either been forgotten or they've been so emphasized that they've become vices.
Okay. Do you can you see it in other places other than Twitter, or is it primarily you see it on Twitter?
I think I mentioned Twitter just once or twice here, so it does. Twitter magnifies it and certainly distorts our sense of it. But these crises play out in real people's real lives and do harm. So
in real churches across the country for poor, underpaid, overworked pastors who can't figure out what to do with what they're seeing in front of them. Okay, so I jump into this book, and you're going to talk about the crisis, and you're going to talk about how to solve America and the church and everything, and then you start talking about Victorian literature. And I'm like, wait, what kind of head fake was that? You're just trying to get me to read Frankenstein again, aren't you? That's what this is all about.
I mean, I'm putting the Notorious and the Notorious KSP, right?
Yeah,
It wouldn't
so-
be me if I weren't
so
talking about Victorian literature.
Here's what you say. Studying Victorian literature, a pattern emerges. You will notice in both the text and their surrounding historical context qualities strangely similar to many of the defining characteristics of modern American evangelical culture. And by seeing in that literature many of the values and beliefs prominent within American evangelicalism today, you might find yourself wondering whether some of the ideas that characterize today's evangelical culture are Christian as much as they are Victorian. Okay, so boom, mic drop. Now you don't have to read the rest of the book. No, the rest
pretty much, right? That's the book.
The rest of the book unpacks that. So why is there a connection between Victorian literature and American evangelical culture?
Right. Great question. So the short history is, which I include in more detail in the book, is that the evangelical revival in England that then came over to America in the form of the Great Awakenings began in the early 18th century as a revival of kind of a nominal Christianity that had taken hold in the existence of a state church. Well, evangelicalism rose in prominence and influence throughout the 18th century in a lot of good ways. I mean, many of the early abolitionists in England were evangelicals. I mean, William Wilberforce was an evangelical. Hannah More was an evangelical. They were really trying to bring about societal reforms for everyone, and they succeeded. Well, their influence was so great that it helped to bring about what we associate. I mean, obviously Queen Victoria brought about the Victorian age, right? That's why it's named after her. But evangelicals had such influence in the 19th century that a lot of what we would associate with Victorian culture, like the emphasis on family and duty and separate spheres for men and women and domesticity and, rigid roles for men and women, those things that we associate with Victorianism, haven't really faded away. We've inherited them. And they aren't all, they may be rooted in some biblical truth, but how they manifest and work out in our lives seems like it's, just Victorian age all over again.
Right. And why is this a book about imagination? Why isn't this the scandal of the evangelical mind? Or rational thought, or good theology that we determined with the scientific method, or whatever. Why are we talking about imagination?
Right. Well, of course, the one with the word mind in it was already written, right?
Okay.
A great book, Mark.
Yeah.
That one was taken. But what I'm talking about here is imagination is fitting because I am talking about art and literature and sort of cultural influences that manifest in the imagination. But what I'm really talking about, the title is a little bit of a little bit misleading because it's not just about the imagination, but it's about a concept that some, I think most people have heard of, whether they've actually read about it, and I try to introduce them to it, is what Charles Taylor, the philosopher who wrote most famous for writing A Secular Age, what he calls the social imaginary. And an imaginary...
The social imaginary what? Imaginary friend?
Okay, grammar lesson. This is imaginary... An imaginary is a noun.
It's a noun.
It's very
okay.
right. It can be
confusing.
an adjective. It is confusing. So an imaginary is like a pool, a communal pool, a collection, a society sort of inherited traditional stories, narratives, images, myths, legends that are handed down that we just sort of, they're in the air that we breathe, and we may not even know, because what Taylor says is they're at the precognitive level. So they're, underneath the consciousness. They're just part of the culture. We might not think about them, but they actually do sort of drive us and motivate us and cast a vision for us. And there isn't just one social imaginary. There isn't just one evangelical social imaginary. There are many of them, many pools, so to speak, but I just try to go through and kind of identify those stories, images, myths, legends, ideas, concepts, precognitive notions that I think have sort of been the driving forces behind evangelicalism for 300 years.
And each chapter of the book hits a different one. They're interesting. The themes or stories, images, and metaphors include awakening, conversion, testimony, improvement. That's pretty broad. Improvement.
Could you improve on that one, maybe?
I could try. Sentimentality, materiality, domesticity, empire, Oh boy, that's fun. Reformation and rapture. So now those are all things that you find in American evangelicalism, concepts of, and everything, tell me if I'm wrong, everything in American evangelicalism can be drawn straight back to the Bible with no other influences.
If you believe that, then I've got, I don't even know what the expression is. I've got some ocean land in Kansas to sell you. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay,
No, exactly. Right. You've made the point, right? Obviously, we're influenced by our culture.
Yeah. But, okay. So these are also themes in Victorian literature. So the themes in evangelicalism are also themes in Victorian literature. So my question is, which came first? The Victorianism, did evangelicalism make Victorianism, or did Victorianism make evangelicalism?
The first. Because
Okay.
it's the history. It's a long history. So evangelicalism arose actually a century before the Victorian age,
Okay.
and so grew in influence and significance. And then by the time Queen Victoria ascended the throne and the Industrial Revolution had really taken a lot of other factors, but evangelicalism kind of wedded with all of those other cultural factors and influenced that age. So evangelicalism helped bring about the Victorian age.
So you had things, you had industrialization happening, you had the Enlightenment happening.
Mm-hmm.
How did the Enlightenment interact with evangelicalism and then Victorianism?
Yeah, great question. So really, the short answer I would give is that evangelicalism is really like a product of the Enlightenment. Now, and that's like good and bad. I mean, the Enlightenment emphasizes experience in terms of like even a scientific experiment. That word comes from the same one. So like trying something out, testing it. And the Enlightenment emphasizes individual subjectivity, like what you experience and how you experience it, and the rise of what we call the modern self or the modern subject, who internalizes, who is a moral agent. These are all things that are completely connected to evangelicalism. Even the emphasis that, and it's not just evangelicalism, we could even go back to the Protestant Reformation, which is also, helped bring about the Enlightenment. Just even the emphasis on each individual having a personal relationship with Jesus, a personal conversion experience. These are things I believe in. I want to go on the record for the discernment bloggers. These are things that I do think are biblical. But evangelicalism has kind of gone with the culture in terms of emphasizing individual subjectivity too much, individual experience too much, that individual relationship with Jesus at the expense maybe of community and church. So all that's good and bad about like the modern age, we can find in evangelicalism.
Okay, so let's pick one of these and kind of play it out so they can see what you're doing in these chapters.
You pick one.
Okay, I'm going to pick Empire. Empire is fun. So how does that play?
You're such a troublemaker. I should have known you'd pick the one that's going to get me in the most trouble.
I just read that one last night. So it was fresh in my mind. But Rudyard Kipling and the white man's burden, and wow, that's fun stuff. But how does that interplay with evangelicalism? Where, because that's something. It's easier to I was going to say it's easier to see empire rising as an outcrop of business interests, the trading companies and the charters that they got to civilize the world for the sake of the British crown. Did evangelicalism influence that, or was it more influenced by that?
Yes.
Okay.
No, so I think this is how culture works. It's both and what I talk about in the chapter on Empire, and actually I want to explain this chapter is a little different from all of the others. You picked it.
Okay.
Because with all of the others, I'm really kind of talking about something that's good and was good and can be good, but how it can go bad when it's distorted. With Empire, I'm not sure that there's much that's good about it. So, but the way that the notion of empire is tied to evangelicalism, I mean, obviously there are empires throughout all of human history, including ancient history, but we've already talked about the Victorian age. Not only was that an age that was heavily influenced by evangelicalism, but it's also an age that was, it was called the British Empire. And it was said that the sun never set on the British Empire, and 1/4 of the globe was ruled by the British Empire. And so empire is an expansion of lands and colonizing lands. It has an imperialist mindset. Even, the great work of missions was often undertaken kind of tied into the notion of empire. I mean, it was, justified to do these things in order to go into other lands and take ownership of them, colonize them, in the name of the gospel, in the name of missions. And many earnest, sincere missionaries went out, still tied to the business and government interests that were part of it. And so we, for the most part, don't do that much anymore, right? We don't.
For the most part.
Right. But that idea, and this is the connection I make in the chapter, we still have like a mindset of empire in what Sky, I actually later learned this. I didn't know this for the longest time. Sky developed that term, evangelical industrial complex.
Yeah,
right?
I read that, and I thought, I think that's Sky's term.
It is Sky's term, and I don't think I learned it in time for this book, but I have a chapter in another book coming out, and I expand on that, and I give him all the credit. So I'm so sorry, Sky. I discovered that in later research.
I forgive you on Sky's behalf.
Excellent.
I have his ring. I can offer you grace.
Okay, I receive it. But even, so even just our approach to church and publishing, and conferences and podcasts, I mean, we come from a people of empire building. And I think that's something that we don't necessarily recognize. It's part of modernity, but it has a long, long history.
Yeah, we think that we in America don't do that because we stopped doing it with armies and started doing it with international companies.
Right.
But we're still building, I have 4,000 hotels on 5 continents. And, we have risk boards on the wall. They're just economic risk boards instead of military risk boards. And then you have folks like, Moody, you mentioned Moody and Falwell and Graham, who end up kind of following that business model of, let's figure out how Christianity can be a global product. And can be franchised and spread like McDonald's, and that went well.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's empire. Okay, I'll give you one that's more sentimentality. I didn't read that chapter. I jumped ahead to empire because I was curious what you did there. So sentimentality. How is that an evangelical and or Victorian distinctive?
Great question. So, and this is actually a favorite chapter of mine. I knew, even when I was in the proposal stages of this book, that I was going to write about sentimentality because I talk about that a lot in teaching literature and culture. I care about art. I care about good art, and I'm an evangelical, so I don't see a lot of it. We again, if you look back in history, the great artists of the pre-modern and early modern world were Christians, and we do have some great artists now. I don't want to dismiss them, but
then they all went to secular colleges and they became heathens.
Oh,
that's how art was ruined, right? Okay, back to you.
Yeah.
Back to you, Karen.
Yeah, no, so I kind of start with just the stereotype we all know is rooted in truth about how so much of, Christian and evangelical art is cheesy, it's bad, it's inferior. We all know that. And I home in on one quality that I think is most responsible for this, and it's sentimentality, which is like sentimentalism is indulging emotion for emotion's sake. And and this, by the way, back to the cover, the very bright cover.
Yes.
Like this picture, this famous painting that I have on the cover and others that I talk about in the book are ones that are sentimental. They picture Jesus as soft and warm and holding sheep and surrounded by suffused light. And it's not that there's no truth in that, but it's such a very incomplete truth.
He may have held a sheep.
He
lovingly.
Love it.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Now,
Yeah.
the picture's a metaphor. I get that. But
Yeah.
what happens is, because we are not very well trained or articulate in art and metaphors as evangelicals, we look at a picture like that famous head of Christ, where Christ looks like a Hollywood movie star in profile, and he's got he's the beautiful white Jesus. I grew up with that image around me, and I just thought that was a picture of Jesus, right? I mean, I just thought that must be what he looked like. Of course, the Bible says he was not comely to behold, and so he certainly couldn't look like that, and also like he was not like 1940s American white guy. So we take comfort in these pictures because they give us something familiar and easy, and that appeals to our emotions. And if we do that too much, again, I'm not a person who says emotions are bad, but when we do that at the expense of like the hard reality or the wrestling or the unfamiliarity, then we turn something that's true and good into something that's a lie.
Yeah. And did that also happen in Victorian literature?
Victorian literature is not all of it, but much of it is well known for that. Even my beloved author Charles Dickens, I don't want to cast much shade on Charles Dickens, but even his works, they were so effective and so popular, in part because of their sentimentality, right? So that's there. A lot of Victorian art is very sentimental,
right. And you see that pop up in the evangelical movement with the Methodists and the Wesleys and the strange warming of my heart, and so the emphasis moves to I had a personal experience that was emotional and made me emote. And if I don't have that experience, I'm not sure if I've had a conversion, which is another very important concept. Have I been converted if I didn't have an emotional experience? And there's still, Christian kids that wrestle with that today. I never had...
And adults.
And adults, after they're not kids anymore. Say, I never had that experience. Am I not saved?
Right.
Interesting. Okay, and it all goes back to the Wesley brothers, who then inspired Charles Dickens.
Well, I kind of like the Wesley brothers. They were abolitionists, and they were trying to revive what they saw as kind of a cold, deadened, nominal Christianity. Right. But again, with all of these examples that I draw out, if you go too far, then what was a virtue ends up a vice. Right.
Do you? How different would it be? Because it's interesting that we're primarily talking about England and the U.S., because that's where evangelicalism rose, and ironically also Victorianism.
Right.
There weren't a whole lot of Victorians in France that were, they were known as the libertines, and the English were the uptight Victorians. So how different might it have been, and this may be a meaningless thought exercise, if evangelical Christianity hadn't become so culturally dominant, both in its ability to influence the culture, but also in the culture's ability to influence it back. Because once a religious sect is in a position of power, you can gain power by adopting the behaviors of that religious sect. And that tends to bring people in who are just adopting it, to have access to power, particularly in the U.S., where you act Christian even if you don't go to church, because it gets you into a better social circle in your Alabama town.
I've never heard of this happening.
Really?
I'm just kidding.
Never? That's okay. Maybe I'm out to lunch. I'm just curious if
no.
The fact that evangelicalism was so influential, does that also mean that it became so influenced?
I think we have.
If we'd stayed a bunch of Puritans being chased around the world and not finding a place to live, many of these themes may not have been at least distorted by popular culture.
No, I think that, it's not like evangelicalism is unique in this way. If there had been some other, we could look at the Catholic Church in different places around the globe and sort of see a parallel track. We are human and our cultures are human, and so we're always going to struggle with these things. But if we are evangelical, then we have a responsibility to grapple with these things. And when we have, corrupt politicians who pretty explicitly say that they're, using, they might not use that word, but it's pretty clear they're using evangelicals to rise to power, and evangelicals are getting into those circles just for the sake of power. They may not say that exactly that way, but they come pretty close. Then we have a responsibility to separate, the baby from the bathwater, so to speak.
The baby Jesus from
the baby Jesus, and not throw him out. We throw out the bathwater, but not baby Jesus.
Exactly. Okay. You say something early on. We cannot desire what we cannot imagine, that's a pretty, you got to just stop there and say, whoa, that's true. If I can't picture it, if it's not in my world of experience, I'm not going to, at least on any conscious level, say that's my goal. If we are to envision an expression of the Christian faith within our culture that is as true to Christ as can be, then we must imagine beyond the realities of our culture that limit our sight. So, why is that hard to do? Why is it hard to imagine beyond the limitations of our culture?
Well, again, I think that there's a term that I use in the book that comes from the field of linguistics called hypocognition, and it refers to cognition is ideas and hypo is under. So it's like ideas that are underneath the surface that are there, but they're so unrecognized, that so below the consciousness that we don't even have words for them. And so, if you just think of, bear with me, I'm drawing this example up, but if you just think of like a small child has like two emotions that they understand, like happy and sad, right? And then as we get older, we kind of learn new words and learn nuances and learn different grades of those things, different names for them. And so we can understand our emotions and our experience differently. And so if we don't even know that we have unexamined assumptions, we just don't know. Like one thing I talk about in the book is being, a grown-up adult before I ever heard that there are some Christians who don't believe the rapture is like a literal rapture. Like I was like, really? Like I did not know that, So right. What turns out to be an interpretation, I just thought was, gospel truth.
Yeah,
and so I didn't even
Creed somewhere.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, and as I say, you should have seen me when I learned that there were creeds. And so so often we don't even know that we have these unexamined assumptions, but we learn that they are by, for me, it was like making a friend who is a Presbyterian, and she told me about her. I was like, wow, those Presbyterians are wild. And it's just as easy as learning, but it also takes intentionality and awareness. We're such an unself-aware kind of people, which is ironic because we live in this digital age where we could learn so much more about what's happening, as we're just kind of, retreating into our tribes.
It's because we have all the cameras flipped around to point at us. So it's hard to notice much.
That's a mic drop. Wow.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And you can use that and attribute it to Sky just for fun.
Okay.
We'll just, throw that out. Okay. You describe these assumptions, the social imaginary as like the structure of the house behind the walls that you can't see. That it's covered in drywall and paper and paint and is there, but you can't see it, so it's hard to examine those assumptions that are behind the walls. And that what we need to do, and this is the idea of reformation, which is one of your chapters, sometimes you have to go into the walls and see, what's good and what's bad and what needs to be rethought. And that is, the healthy form of deconstruction. Is to say, hey, let's look at these walls that were added in the 80s that are kind of funky and lean to the left. I'm not sure that was part of the original plan.
Or lean to the right.
Or lean to the right. That's good. Yeah, it was the walls in the 30s that lean to the left and the walls in the 80s that lean to the right. How do we separate, if you actually want to do that, how do you separate the good studs from the bad studs? How do you know how to keep the gold and throw away the dross? How do you do that? And it can't just be, say, Bible.
Oh, I was going to say you ask the carpenter.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I mean,
Haven't
really,
we been doing that all along?
Well, I don't know. I think we've been, my metaphors are getting a little out of control now. I'm not gonna.
Sorry.
You can. Yeah, use your imagination. We've been asking a lot of other people besides the carpenter. No, I mean, and I know that's a simplistic answer, but that's kind of where I land the book too, because I don't have any other answer. Jesus is the way, right? Jesus is the way, and we aren't going to be perfect. We're not going to get it all right, but I'm just, we cannot judge a person's heart. We cannot judge their salvation, but we can see when people are trying to follow Jesus, right? We can, and we know ourselves when we are, or we're trying to follow someone else. I mean, we don't always, the heart is deceitful, but we have a true standard, and the point is we have to at least try to measure these structures and these moldings, and I ran out of, I'm not a carpenter, so, but
lintels.
We have to try to measure that. Yeah. Lintel. Yeah. There's a good word.
Thank you.
Yeah. I personally, I'm all about the decorating, right? I like to, the paint and the wallpaper. Right. Yeah. That's the fun stuff.
New wallpaper doesn't necessarily solve the problem.
Exactly.
Of bad studs behind the wall. But you'd say, fundamentally and this is one of the reasons, I've had a lot of people encourage me to read historically, read the church fathers. Don't just, so you're not just reading in your cultural context of North American Christians born in 1950 or later. So you can see, oh, wow, this sentiment that I've accepted doesn't seem to appear before, it's like Rapture, doesn't appear before Darby in 1830. Right. So we did a couple episodes on Darby.
And look at he was, I had to do some research. Yeah, that was fun. But when we can look at the global church too, right? Because the American Evangelical Church is not the only one, and we have a lot to learn from our brothers and sisters throughout history and across the globe.
That is so true. I remember someone talking on the show that they went to they were hanging out with Christians in Ireland and started to suspect that they were all socialists. I think these Christians are socialists because the way they talk about what they want the government to do to help people, I thought all Christians were against, so it's just like going somewhere else and listening to other people.
I thought they were all Republicans.
Yeah, well, where I'm from. Okay, what gives you hope? Karen Swallow Pryor.
Well, of course, Jesus gives me hope, but and it's really what prompted this book. I do see, I tell my students all the time, human history is a history of pendulum swings, from one extreme to the other, and often one error is corrected with an overcorrection, so that's not good, and we can look throughout history and see that. And if the evangelical American church has indulged in excesses, which I think it has, I do see the next generations kind of correcting that. Now they'll make their own errors, but I just love the younger generation's desire to be more holistic, have a faith of integrity, to see the Bible and apply the Bible in its entirety, not just certain verses, and there's just something about the young people, especially who grew up in evangelical subculture and see those excesses and do want the baby and not the bathwater. They give me hope, and just recognizing that other people are going through a similar process. I'm not the only one. You're not the only one. History gives me hope because we saw some terrible things happen 500 years ago in the church, some really hard things, people being burned at the stake and things like that. It hasn't come to that yet, but and so maybe we're going through a similarly dramatic refining moment, and it's hard for us right now, but maybe the church will be better for it in the next age to come.
That's a great thought. Gee, finally, have you seen Barbie?
I have not seen it yet. I'm waiting for the crowds to diminish, and then I
okay.
will go see it.
I'm just curious.
It.
What Barbie? I want you to tell me when you've seen it. What does Barbie tell us about our social imaginary in America right now?
I wish I'd seen it now. Yeah, no,
I haven't seen it.
I
yet.
know
I still
it's
need to see it.
satirical. I know that,
Yeah.
so I know it's going to tell us so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What are you reading these days? Anything interesting right now?
I'm reading, for fun, I'm reading Cormac McCarthy's novel, Child of God. It's really dark, so it's fun.
Oh, fun
Yeah,
and
I
dark.
think it's an older one. It's very dark. Cormac
Okay.
McCarthy always is. So, yeah, that's what I'm reading. And I just finished Russell Moore's
His new one?
book. Yeah, his new
Yeah.
one. Yeah. And I had to underline all of the things that made connections with my book. We approached it totally differently.
Wow.
But there's so many connections. So that was.
Yeah, well, lots of people are thinking about what we're looking at. What am I looking at?
Yeah,
It's
that's why it gives me hope, because we're not the only ones.
It's kind of like when you go out for dinner with your wife and you come back and the dog has gone insane in your house and and you just walk in and say, what am I looking at? Exactly. What happened here? And so then you write a book about it. Like, here's what went wrong when we went out to dinner and how we need to fix it. And that's what you and Russell Moore are doing. You just came back from dinner. You're looking in the evangelical living room saying, what am I looking at and how do we fix it? And I like that your approach pulls in your area of expertise, in literature and looking at the interplay of Victorianism and evangelicalism and how you can see that not by, polling people who no longer exist, but by reading what they wrote, see what were the popular works and how do you see that manifesting themselves today, whether it's Rudyard Kipling or, George Orwell or, anyone in between. It's fascinating to see how evangelicalism and Victorianism basically did the tango for 100 years and had pop culture.
Had a baby.
Yeah, had pop culture babies, and now we're like, wow, are those his dad's eyes or his mother's eyes? I'm not even sure. Am I helping sell the book?
That's a great metaphor.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like. Yeah, you're good at this.
That's my best one yet. Thank you. You can say Sky thought of it. That's okay. Okay, Karen Swallow Pryor. The book is The Evangelical Imagination: How Stories, Images, and Metaphors Created a Culture in Crisis. Don't focus on the crisis. Focus on the fascinating way that we can learn about the social imaginary and how it helps us understand where we are today. Okay, Karen, thanks for being on the show. As always, it's been a pleasure talking to you. All right, and everybody, thanks for listening, and we will see y'all next time.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.